In this video, we will answer some common and not so common questions we receive about adding oil to the air conditioning system when replacing the compressor. There is a lot of confusion about compressor lubrication and oil distribution in an air conditioning system. Here are some of the questions we will try to answer. Do your compressors come with a full system charge of oil? Do I need to add more oil in addition to any oil already in the new compressor? Should I drain any existing oil from the new compressor first? Should I count the existing oil already in the new compressor as part of the total oil charge? Should I add the total oil charge amount to the compressor, or do I need to add some elsewhere in the system? I am working on an aftermarket system. I cannot find an oil charge specification. How much oil should I add? Please note that if you are replacing a compressor with either a new or remanufactured unit for any reason, we are assuming that you are starting with a completely empty system. In other words, that every inch of the refrigerant path is either new or flushed. As these graphs clearly show, the average system oil and refrigerant charge amounts today are only about half what they were just 20 years ago. With much less oil and refrigerant in the system, there is simply no room for error when making repairs. We must have exactly the right type, amount and viscosity of oil where it needs to be in the system right from the moment the compressor first starts to turn. Too little oil results in lack of lubrication and eventually the compressor seizes. Too much oil can slug or liquid lock the compressor, causing catastrophic damage. Excessive oil also significantly reduces system performance by forming a thermal blanket on the internal heat exchange surfaces of the condenser and evaporator. To begin answering the questions we posed earlier, it is important to understand our compressor labeling system. All our new and remanufactured compressors are labeled to indicate the oil status of the compressor when you take it out of the box. Compressors with the pink label are charged with 3 ounces of the appropriate oil. This oil does not need to be drained. However, it must be counted as part of the overall system oil charge amount. For example, if a system calls for 7 ounces of PAG 46, then you would need to add an additional 4 ounces to the system to bring the total oil charge up to 7 ounces. We will discuss the process of where and how to add the additional oil a little bit later. A yellow label on the compressor indicates that it contains shipping oil only. This oil is not appropriate for system operation and should be completely drained. The full system charge amount of oil will need to be added to the system. Again, we will discuss how much and where to add in a moment. An orange compressor label indicates that the compressor has been shipped dry. Obviously, the full manufacturer's recommended amount of the correct oil should be added. Compressors with a green label are pre-charged with 3 ounces of R1234YF oil. If the compressor is being used in a R1234YF system, it will not be necessary to drain this oil. As in the pink label example, just add the additional amount necessary to bring the total oil charge up to specification. However, if the compressor is being used in an R134A system, then the compressor should be drained and the full system charge amount of the recommended oil added. Where and how to add oil to the air conditioning system depends primarily on 2 things. The first is whether the compressor has a crankcase or not, and the second is whether it is an orifice tube or TXV system. On systems that use a piston swash variable displacement compressor with a crankcase, the total oil charge amount can be added directly to the crankcase through the oil plug, as we are doing here. It does not matter whether the system is an orifice tube or TXV system. Note that on a few later model applications, the crankcase oil plug may be located behind the front pulley. Variable displacement compressors can also usually be identified by the displacement control valve in the rear head. Older models use an internal pneumatic control valve, which is usually held in place with a snap ring, as you can see here, while more modern compressors use an electric externally controlled valve that can easily be identified by the 2-terminal connector. Now let's discuss adding oil to systems that use a compressor without a crankcase. To reduce the likelihood of compressor slugging on initial startup, we recommend adding only half the oil charge to the compressor itself through the suction port. You may need to turn the compressor by hand as you are adding the oil in order to draw all the oil in. It is a good idea to cap the suction and discharge ports to prevent oil draining out or dirt entering during compressor mounting. Add the other half of the oil charge to the low side of the system. On orifice tube systems, add the other half of the oil charge to the accumulator through its inlet port. That's the one that connects to the evaporator. On TXV systems, add the other half of the oil charge to the evaporator. Do not add oil to the receiver dryer, as this can impede proper refrigerant flow on initial startup, as the slug of oil from the dryer works its way through the TXV. There are many different compressor designs that may not have a crankcase. Here are some common examples. Axial compressors, such as this GM H series and this Ford FS10 design. Scroll compressors, which can usually be identified by 4 symmetrically spaced bolts in the rear head of the compressor. Radial design compressors like this R4, and rotary vane compressors, which can usually be identified by a reed keeper plate on the side of the compressor. An alternative method of adding oil to non-crankcase compressors is to mount the compressor in the vehicle first, then detach the suction line from the accumulator or the evaporator and pour half the oil charge down the suction line toward the compressor. Caution! It is absolutely critical that all compressors, regardless of the type or system design, should be turned through at least 10 complete revolutions by hand after the lines are connected, but before attempting to start the engine. This is necessary to move any excess oil out of the cylinders to avoid catastrophic damage due to slugging on initial startup. Special tools are available to make the compressor easier to turn. Note that a new compressor is often hard to turn. This is because the new piston rings thrusting out against the cylinder walls create significant initial drag. If a label is missing or you're in any doubt about how much oil is already in a compressor, the best approach is to drain the compressor completely and start over. Keep in mind that thoroughly draining all the oil from a compressor takes time and effort. If the compressor has a crankcase, you will need to remove the oil plug and also drain oil from both the suction and discharge ports. Hold the compressor over a drain pan and turn it by hand while keeping the oil drain and/or suction discharge ports facing downward. If possible, set the compressor to drain over an oil pan for 15 or 20 minutes. On compressors without a crankcase, you can only drain oil from the suction and discharge ports. Note that these older A6 axial design and these inline York-Tecumseh compressors do have a crankcase, to which the total oil charge should be added by way of the oil plug opening. Don't forget to take account of any oil already in the compressor by referring to the colored label. If for some reason you do not have the specific oil amount specification, a rough rule of thumb is a ratio of at least 20% oil to refrigerant by volume. For example, a system that calls for 25 ounces of R134A would require 5 ounces of oil. When you take a new or remanufactured compressor out of the box, stand it on its nose for about 5 minutes before installing it in the vehicle. Oil may have drained away from the front seal and bearing during storage. Standing it on its nose allows oil to wick down into the seal and bearing area to prevent possible seal damage due to a dry startup. Thank you for watching.